Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Okay, good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the ISA PG's competitive posters category. We have 10 posters. To judge these posters, we have with us judges Dr. Rekha Das, Dr. S.P. Chittora, Dr. Vishwanath Hiremat, and Dr. J.P. Attri. Participants and judges, kindly note, for presentation, presenters have 5 minutes and 1 minute for Q&A. At the 4th minute, the presenter will get a voice alert saying 1 minute left. And after the 5 minutes, your audio will be muted. Let's start the first paper presentation of ISA WebCon Kerala 2020. We have with us Dr. Anju. Dr. Anju Teresa. Share your screen.
Is it visible?
Not visible.
Turn on your video.
It is not visible.
Am I visible?
You're visible. Yeah. Your video. Your presentation video. Open the PPT.
Is it visible now?
Yes. Dr. Anju, and your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My poster is on the topic COVID pediatric anesthesia and realizing opportunities. It is a case report on anoplasty done on a 1-day-old COVID positive newborn in our hospital. The COVID-19 scenario has exacted anesthesiologists all over the world to provide the safest anesthesia service possible in challenging conditions. The transmission of COVID to neonates is thought to occur primarily through respiratory droplets during the postnatal period, such as when the baby is being breastfed by the COVID-positive mother or being taken care of by other workers. Most newborn surgical procedures are done under general anesthesia with endotracheal intubation. Intubation, positive pressure ventilation, and extubation are all aerosol-generating procedures, which according to studies show they generate around 6.6 times higher aerosols than a normal resting COVID patient. And this requires a high level of protection for us. Babies born with anorectal malformations, and in our case, a male baby with imperforate anus, they require immediate surgery to restore the normal bowel continuity. To obviate the risk of general anesthesia, post-operative complications, and theatre pollution, our patient was taken up for surgery under awake caudal epidural block. A 1-day-old term newborn weighing 2.7 kgs presented to the emergency theatre with failure to pass meconium due to imperforate anus. Any congenital cardiac lesions were ruled out prior to the procedure. The mother had been detected to be COVID positive antenatally, and on preoperative checkup, the COVID status of the baby was also found to be positive. He was, however, afebrile and free of any respiratory symptoms. Hence, the procedure was to be done in an exclusive COVID theatre. The baby had been breastfed until 4 hours prior to the planned procedure and was advised nil per rose thereafter. All the drugs and equipments necessary for general anesthesia and any emergencies had been kept ready. The COVID-19 standard precautions with personal protective equipment had been taken by all the theatre personnel. We monitored the baby using electrocardiogram, pulse oximetry, and non-invasive blood pressure. The baby had a 24-gauge cannula in situ in his right hand, and we pre-medicated him with 0.04 milligram of atropine IV. The baby was placed in right lateral position with flexion of knees and hips, and under strict asepsis, the caudal area was painted and draped. The sacral hiatus, limited by the 2 sacral conova, was palpated along the spinous process line, and we used a 24-gauge scalp being set for the puncture of the sacrococcygeal membrane, which was identified by the giveaway field. A further 1 to 2 millimeter advancement of the needle was done, and we administered a total dose of 2.5 ml, which corresponds to 1 ml per kg, according to the Armitage formula, comprising of 1 ml, 1% lignocaine with 1 in 4 lakh adrenaline plus 1.5 ml, 0.2% bupivacaine. The baby had no discomfort or noxious stimuli in the sacral dermatomes. We waited for for some duration for the block to act, and this was also confirmed by the surgeon. The baby was then positioned supine, and all the exposed parts were covered and kept warm so as to prevent hypothermia, and the procedure was begun. Vitals were monitored continuously and ensured to be normal, and we administered maintenance fluid with 1/4 normal saline at 11 drops per minute via measured volume set, and this was continued throughout the procedure. Anoplasty lasted for 40 minutes, and post-operatively, the vitals were stable, the baby was active, alert, and moving all limbs. So regional anesthesia in a COVID patient preserves the respiratory function if already compromised by pneumonia. And the reduction in the generation of aerosol minimizes the exposure of the operating team to the COVID virus. And the analgesia provided by the caudal block extends well into the post-operative period, thereby reducing the post-operative morbidity. So in conclusion, the potential benefits of regional anesthesia to both the patient and the healthcare workers makes it a preferred alternative in a
1
COVID
minute
positive
left.
patient. That is, when the site of the surgery, the duration of the surgery, and the expected complications permit the use of regional anesthesia alone. Also the patient profile. Thank you. And these are my references.
Thank you, Anju. Over to Judge Dr. Rekha Das.
What was the IV fluid that you gave to the patient? Why did you choose NS, 1/4 NS?
Madam, we usually, in our institution, we usually give dextrose along with the normal saline. So this is 1/4 normal saline. It has got 4 by 5 5% dextrose and 1/4 part of 1 by 5 part of this normal saline. So that is what we usually use to provide dextrose during the perioperative period and to prevent hypoglycemia in the neonates, especially within 1 day old.
So did you monitor the blood glucose level of the child? The COVID
Post-operatively, yes, madam. Intraoperatively on table when the patient arrived and as well when the patient left, before shifting the patient after the theatre.
You did not mention, I think, the monitoring.
No, ma'am, I didn't. Sorry, I missed
it. And then what are the blood pressure parameters that you observed in this patient?
We monitored for non-invasive blood pressure monitoring. That is it.
What was your blood pressure value? Did you experience any blood pressure fall in this child?
No, madam. The baby was very stable, hemodynamically stable. Even after the block, the baby's baseline blood pressure was maintained. There wasn't any fall actually.
And did you need any sedation for the child? Sedation for the child?
No, madam.
How did you manage?
We didn't give any sedation. Madam, actually, the child, on arrival itself, the child was it wasn't a crying child. And intraoperatively, during the period of the surgery, we actually used a gauze soaked in dextrose used as a pacifier, basically. We kept it at the corner of the mouth so the child was suckling at it and he was comfortable that way. And we were also watching at the head end. So in that way, he was satisfied and he was pacified that way. We didn't need to give any sedation.
Yes, I hope you understand the problems of not sedating the child, a COVID child in a OT. The child may cry, may generate a lot of aerosol. So you need to take some precautions. So how did you manage that?
So that is why, in case the child would have turned restless, or if the child showed any signs of discomfort, we would have planned. Or if the block was inadequate, the child, we would have proceeded with GA. So we had kept all those general anesthetic drugs and all the equipments ready for general anesthesia as well. So it was just because the procedure was short and the site was just, it was just a small 40-minute procedure, and the site permitted we went for a sole portal block, madam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over to
Thank
other
you,
judges.
ma'am.
Over to other judges if they would ask any questions.
Thank you, madam.
Any other doctor? Would you like to ask any question? Others, please.
Yes, Dr. Anju.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Doctor,
what are the
Tina,
complications in regional anesthesia you have expected in such a small child when you are given a regional anesthesia? What are the complications you may face in this such type of?
In this one, the baby would
Margin
have
of safety is very.
hypotension is one possibility.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Any neurological damage?
Considering this child, since he had an imperforate anus, there is the possibility that he might have had any associated vertebral anomalies, but the site of the puncture and the preoperatively, the baby was moving all his limbs. So that is why we proceeded with regional anesthesia in this child.
Since you have given in this the regional anesthesia, what?
Yes, sir.
So did you expect or something neurological damage or injury by your procedure?
In this case, considering the fact that anorectal malformations may have associated vertebral anomalies, there is that risk. So,
okay.
Judges, please note we have only 1 minute for the Q&A. With the interest of time, let's move to the next participant.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Anju. Thank you, Chitto sir. Thank you, Rika ma'am. We'll move to the next participant.
Yeah.
Next participant is Dr. Nisha. Dr. Nisha?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. And your time starts now.
Good afternoon, judges. Myself, Dr. Nisha Lasar, is presenting a case report on anesthetic management of a patient with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome posted for transurethral resection of prostate. Anesthetic management of patients with cardiac conduction anomalies is challenging because of life-threatening arrhythmias like supraventricular tachycardia and atrial fibrillation are likely intraoperatively. Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, otherwise called as pre-excitation syndrome, is an electrophysiological disorder of heart where abnormal conduction pathway connects atria to the ventricle, bypassing the AV node. Coming to the case history, we had a 63-year-old male who presented with obstructive lower urinary tract symptoms for the past 2 months. He also had history of 2 episodes of palpitations 3 years back, and since then he is on tab verapamil 40 mg once daily. He had no history of syncope, dizziness or chest pain, and there is no other comorbidities. He is asymptomatic at present and he has good effort tolerance. On examination, his pulse rate was around 80 beats per minute, regular rhythm and normal volume. His blood pressure was 130/80 millimeters of mercury in right arm in sitting position. His airway was normal. General and systemic examinations were within normal limits. On pre-anesthetic evaluation, we did lab tests for complete blood count, renal function tests, serum electrolytes, coagulation profile, and thyroid function tests, all were within normal limits. His blood group was B positive. His ECG showed sinus rhythm with short PR interval and pre-excitation delta wave, which was suggestive of Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. His echocardiography was taken and left ventricular ejection fraction was 79% and there was no regional wall motion abnormality. Cardiologist opinion was taken and he advised to continue verapamil 40 mg 3 times daily. Coming to the anesthetic management, patient was explained about spinal anesthesia and risk of perioperative arrhythmias, informed written consent taken, pre-cross-matched blood was arranged. On arrival in the operating room, ECG, non-invasive BP, pulse oximetry monitors were placed. His right radial artery was cannulated for invasive BP monitoring. IV access was secured with 18-gauge cannula Administered oxygen at 6 liters per minute through normal face mask. We confirmed the availability of defibrillator and antiarrhythmic drugs. After that, we premedicated the patient with midazolam 1 milligram and fentanyl 50 micrograms. Under strict aseptic precautions under local anesthesia, we induced the patient with spinal anesthesia with ropivacaine 0.75% 2 milligram. We achieved a sensory block level of T10. The surgery lasted for about 45 minutes and IV crystalloids around 850 ml was given intraoperatively. The patient was hemodynamically stable throughout the surgery. ECG lead 2 showed Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome pattern. His heart rate varied between 68 to 82 beats per minute. Postoperative period was uneventful and he was discharged on the third day. Coming to the discussion, the anesthetic considerations in such patients are: we should avoid sympathetic stimulation by pain, anxiety or hypovolemia. Here we consider regional anesthesia because it can avoid polypharmacy and the stress response during laryngoscopy and intubation. We should avoid drugs that produce tachycardia such as glycopyrrolate, atropine and ketamine. There is a potential for perioperative supraventricular tachycardias and atrial fibrillation. So we should consider crash carts, defibrillators, invasive arterial access, emergency drugs such as proctinemide, amiodarone, adagosin, etc. And we should avoid AV node blockers if there is atrial fibrillation also. To conclude, patients with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome can be managed successfully with central neuraxial block, provided the level of block is monitored cautiously. Meticulous preoperative evaluation and intraoperative monitoring are of paramount importance in successful management of the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the judges. Dr. Chittor, sir.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Nisha,
Yes, sir.
as, since your patient is for TURP,
Yes, sir.
mostly these patients are elderly. And in such type of patients, there is already sometimes compromise. Why you have chosen this regional? Because but still there is a severe sympathetic block may be there. Already these patients are autonomically imbalanced. So what do you think about? What complications you may face ultimately once potent sympatholytic effect will be there?
Yes, sir. There is risk of hypotension and bradycardia in patients if we are giving spinal anesthesia. But the advantage of giving in TURP, spinal anesthesia is the anesthetic technique of choice, and spinal anesthesia avoids multiple drug administration, and we can get postoperative analgesia.
Then,
And so we choose spinal
since
anesthesia.
sympathetic block is severe in the spinal anesthesia or regional anesthesia, you have given the spinal subarachnoid
Yes,
block,
yes,
and then there is a potent sympatholytic effect.
yes.
Now, how you did manage the fluid balance? Did you measure how? Because in TURP there is a fluid overloading sometimes if you don't measure.
Yes.
Did you measure the central venous pressure?
No, central venous pressure was not. It was not
And how you manage
accessible.
that fluid load is not there, because these patients are mostly complicated with this TURP syndrome in which there is a fluid loading, etc. How did you measure that?
Actually, glycine was used by the surgeon. There is a risk of TURP syndrome, but the procedure only lasted for less than 45 minutes. And the level of glycine was balanced as low as possible so that less fluid is absorbed.
What you thought about the management of the hypotension if it occurs? Which drug you preferred?
I prefer Frenin, sir. We should avoid tachycardia. And
Phenylephrine?
yes, sir.
Which drug? Which drug?
Phenylephrine, sir.
Phenylephrine.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next judge?
Yes.
Ma'am, any questions? Ma'am, unmute.
Yeah, I would just ask one question. Suppose your patient gets arrhythmia, what drug would you prefer in this particular patient? What drug?
If the patient is having supraventricular tachycardia, first we should go for vagal maneuvers. If that doesn't work, we can go for adenosine, 6 milligram IV push. And if not working, 12 milligram IV.
Your patient goes into VT, ventricular tachycardia. That is a possibility in WPW, no?
Yes, madam.
What drug will you give for VT? How will you manage VT? Ventricular tachycardia.
We can give amiodarone.
Have you gone through the, yes, very good. Have you
150.
gone through the 2020 ASA guideline? American
Yes.
Heart Association guideline?
Yes, madam.
Which drug has been introduced again?
I don't remember. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, judges. We'll move to the next talk. It is by Dr. Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed, kindly share your screen.
Yeah, sure. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Dr. Mohammed, your time starts
Yes,
now.
yes. Okay. Good afternoon, judges. My topic for the poster presentation is comparative study on effectiveness of zinc lozenge and magnesium lozenge on postoperative sore throat. So postoperative sore throat or post is one of the most common and distressing adverse event experienced by patients receiving general anesthesia with tracheal intubation. Irritation and inflammation of the airway were considered the cause of post. Various preventive methods are being used to decrease the complaint of postoperative sore throat. They include non-pharmacological methods and pharmacological methods. So in this study, I have taken zinc and magnesium under pharmacological methods. Zinc is involved in diverse physiologic processes such as growth, immune system modulation, tissue repair, and it also acts as an anti-inflammatory agent. Zinc has shown to be effective in prevention of oral mucositis, xerostomia, and pain associated with chemotherapy. Magnesium has antinociceptive effects that are primarily based on the inhibition of calcium entry in the cell and blocks the NMDA receptors. So the aim of the study is to study the effect of zinc lozenge on postoperative sore throat, to study the effect of magnesium lozenge on postoperative sore throat, and to compare the effectiveness of magnesium lozenge and zinc lozenge in postoperative sore throat. We included patients at the age group of 18 to 65 years and the patient that belonged to ASA1 and ASA2, and the patient posted for surgery under GA with endotracheal intubation lasting for more than 1 hour and less than 4 hours, and surgery in supine position. And we excluded patients that are not cooperative or unwilling, and patients with ASA grade more than 2, and patients with history of preoperative sore throat, upper respiratory tract illness. So we selected totally 90 patients and were randomly divided into 3 groups. The first group is group zinc group, 30 patients. They received zinc lozenge with 40 milligram elemental zinc in the form of zinc sulfate 30 minutes prior to surgery. And the magnesium group, they received magnesium lozenge in the form of magnesium citrate, which contains 100 milligram magnesium ion content per dose 30 minutes prior to surgery. And the group C, 30 patients, they received candy, sweet candy 30 minutes prior to surgery. And the sore throat assessment and hemodynamic recordings were done before giving lozenges or candy pre-induction and the 2, 4, 8, 12, and 24 hours post-operatively. Postoperative sore throat was graded on a 4-point scale, that is 0 to 3. 0 for nil, 1 for mild, 2 for moderate, and 3 for severe. So as you can see in the results, the incidence of post was significantly reduced in magnesium group compared to control group and the zinc group. And the vision analog score was also significantly, mean vision analog score was also reduced in magnesium group compared to the control group and the zinc group. And visual analog score was also reduced in zinc group as compared to the control group. So the incidence of post was 86%, 80%, 67%, 60%, and 53.3% in control group. And it was 40, 32%, 27, 16.6, and 6.67 in magnesium group. and 66.6, 58, 46.6, 38.9, and 30 in zinc group at 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, and 24 hours interval respectively. There was a significant reduction in incidence of post in magnesium group compared to zinc and control group. So in a study conducted by Farhang B, there was the incidence of post with zinc lozenge was 0%, 10%, 7%, and 23% at 0, 2, 4, and 24 hours. And the study conducted by Borazan with magnesium lozenges, it was 17%, 23%, 14%, and 3% at 0, 2, 4, and 24 respectively. So a study in Chattopadhyay, the VAS score was compared with aspirin and magnesium gargle, and it was found out that
1 minute left.
aspirin VAS score with aspirin was higher than group. From the study, I concluded that the magnesium lozenge is more effective than zinc lozenge in preventing the postoperative sore throat. Thank you. This is my reference.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Over to judges, Dr. Atri, sir.
Hello everyone.
Yes, sir. Audible.
I'm actually the candidate belongs to my institution, GMC Amritsar, so I request other judges to judge him.
Okay, sir. Over to Rekha ma'am. Ma'am, unmute.
Okay. Am I unmuted now?
Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
Okay. How did you calculate your sample size?
Ma'am, I consulted with my statistician that 30 samples, whether I can correlate with the incidence and significance, and he told me that 90 samples will be approximate. Minimum sample requirement 30 will be enough for the derivation of the result.
Based on what? How did you get? What was the difference, significance, alpha error, beta error? How much did you take? And what was the difference that you had kept when calculating your sample size?
Sorry, ma'am.
What difference of value did you keep as a significant value in order to calculate your sample size with a predefined value of alpha error and a beta error? Okay, over to next question.
Ma'am, I hypothesis.
Are you answering?
Sorry, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Did you understand my question?
No, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am.
Okay. How was the blinding done?
Ma'am, actually, we have put all the candies in a packet, and it was marked with by one of my colleagues, and I handed over that packets to my patients. So I don't know whether I was not aware which candy is which packet is which tablet.
And who did the recording of the VAS score? For 1 day you had to do, no? For 24 hours. You had to calculate the VAS score for 24 hours, no? Sore throat. So who did it?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I already did, ma'am.
Okay. And one last question. Carry on. Okay, finish.
What criteria you have taken for the sore throat? Either it was a VAS, pain, or something else? Because not only pain is sometimes the last.
Sir, I taken.
Yes.
I have taken, sir, in account, first of all, sore throat initially, then cough, then hoarseness was also taken into account. Then dryness of throat was also taken into account.
Before it, have you eliminated those factors?
Yes, sir.
Just like
patient
dryness or the endotracheal tube, whether you used cup tube or plain tube?
So cuff tube.
Cup tube.
Yes,
it was a fresh or reused?
Sorry, sir, I didn't get the question.
You used always fresh, because there are some red rubber tubes people are using, reusing. Hello, am I audible to you?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Sir, Yes, yes, sir.
Have you eliminated the factor of using the fresh shop tube? Always you have used the new tube, fresh, sterilized.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Always fresh tube. Yes, sir.
Have you put the jelly on it? Just to remove
No,
the
sir.
mechanical irritation sometimes may cause the shorts. But I think you did not mention.
No, no, sir. I didn't do that.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next session, judges?
Okay,
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, judges.
Thank you. Sir.
Next, we have with us Dr. Sri Lakshmi. Sri Lakshmi, can you please share your screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Go to the presentation mode.
Is it visible?
Yes,
Okay. Can I start now, madam?
yes. And your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sri Lakshmi Priya from Regional Cancer Center, Trivandrum. I am here presenting a case of systemic sclerosis patient undergoing modified radical mastectomy under general anesthesia and pectoralis glove successfully. Systemic sclerosis is a rare multisystem disorder with an incidence of 2.3 to 10 per million cases. There occurs functional and structural changes in vascular beds along with progressive visceral organ dysfunction due to fibrosis. These patients may present to us with varying clinical significance. In our case, a 66-year-old lady came with a carcinoma of breast and she underwent neoadjuvant chemotherapy. After that, posted for modified radical mastectomy. She was a non-case of bronchial asthma since 20 years and hypertensive. Also was diagnosed with a systemic sclerosis with anti-syndromial autoantibody positive 2 years back. On pre-anesthetic evaluation, we found the following positive findings in her. There was history of gastroesophageal reflux disease along with thick skin, which is the characteristic hallmark sign of scleroderma. Scars of healed digital ulcers were present. And airway examination revealed Mallampati 2 with limited neck movements. CT thorax showed cystic bronchiectatic changes along with fibrotic changes. Pulmonary function test revealed mild obstruction along with mild restriction. Arterial blood gas analysis was normal. 2D echo revealed a suspicious echogenic mass in the right atrium, probably a right atrial myxoma, but there was no evidence of pulmonary artery hypertension and her systolic function was good enough with an ejection fraction of 64%. Other systemic examination was within normal limit and a complete blood count, renal function test, liver function test and clotting screen, everything came normal, ruling out other system involvement. Primary anesthesia concerns were the risk of aspiration, difficulty in obtaining IV and arterial access, difficulty in obtaining a pre-op block, Raynaud's phenomenon when exposed to cold environment inside the operation theatre, anticipated difficult airway, poor lung complaints, pulmonary hypertension, and an additional risk of embolism or symptoms due to the mechanical obstruction by the right atrial mass.
ಅವತ್ತಿಂದ ಚಾಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಉಂಟಾ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಎಂತಾದ್ರೂ ಉಂಟಾ ನೋಡಿ
Operatively, we stopped aspirin 5 days prior. Hypertension controlled using amlodipine, calcium channel blocker. OT was kept ready with forced air warmer and warm fluids. Ultrasound guided IV and arterial access were obtained. Standard ASA monitors along with cardiac output and temperature monitoring were kept. Pulse oximeter kept in different digits and modified rapid sequence intubation and induction with etomidate and succinylcholine. We intubated the trachea with a cupped oral ET tube of 7.5 mm ID using video laryngoscope and stillet. Maintenance of anesthesia was done with sevoflurane, oxygen, nitrous, and vecuronium. Goal-directed fluid therapy with the aid of cardiac output monitoring. Analgesia by IV paracetamol and intraoperatively pectoralis block with 0.2% ropivacaine 10 ml each under direct vision was given by the surgeons. Reversal of the residual neuromuscular blockade with neostigmine and glycopyrrolate, and patient was extubated uneventfully. Postoperative period was also uneventful and she was discharged the very next day. Literally, all systems can be affected in varying degrees. Also, these patients will be on various medications to slow down the progression of disease. Systemic sclerosis patients have an additional risk of getting cancers, especially long-standing cases will present with esophageal carcinomas and lung cancers. And carcinoma, breast, ovarian tumors.
1 minute left.
Ovarian tumors, ovarian tumors and lymphomas are in close temporal association with the clinical onset of systemic sclerosis. So it is quite often systemic sclerosis patients will present for cancer surgeries. Meticulous examination and detailed evaluation of each system is needed in order to formulate a successful anesthetic plan. Anticipating problems in difficult cases along with adequate preparations and precaution help us to provide safe anesthesia in this complicated, uncommon, problematic cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Lakshmi. Over to Judge Dr. Atri.
Hello. Student, you mentioned that pectoralis block was given. What type of PEC was given? Whether it is PEC 1 or PEC 2?
We gave
What is the difference?
Pectoralis 2 block, sir. Pectoralis 2, it also actually includes pectoralis 1 and 2. Pectoralis 2, 1 is giving in between medial pectoral and pectoralis muscle to block the pectoral nerves supplying the pectoral muscles. Then pectoralis 2 is given between the serratus anterior and the pectoralis minor muscle. It includes both, PEC 2 includes both PEC 1 and PEC 2. We give PEC 2 to say it's with
What dose you have used in this block? Dose.
Those we gave a 0.2 ml with 10 ml each. We gave in a slightly reduced dose because in systemic sclerosis patient, local anesthesia, the prolonged effect can be there. It is made use to give a better post-operative analgesia. Since because of the muscle connective tissue fibrosis and the perineural fibrosis, everything, the action of local anesthesia is prolonged in this patient. So we used only 10 ml and 10 ml for PEC 1 and PEC 2.
Any other block you know for this these type of patient other than the PEC block? Other types of block?
We can give a erector spinae block can be given for
serratus anterior block.
Serratus anterior block can be given, sir.
Okay. You have mentioned that patient, you stopped the aspirin 5 days before. What dose she was getting before surgery?
She was actually getting low dose aspirin only, 75 milligram daily.
So was there any need to stop the aspirin?
Not necessarily, not indicated actually, but still she was not taking for any coronary artery disorder, this low dose aspirin, only for this to prevent. Rheumatologist has started to prevent the vascular ischemic digital ulcers. For that progression they have stopped it. So these patients will have a more bleeding tendency with the coagulation abnormalities, and also we thought we can safely stop low dose, but it is not necessary as such. Low dose aspirin can be continued.
Okay.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next judge? Over to Rekha ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I would ask you one question. Hello. Yeah, am I audible? Yeah. You said that the patient had systemic sclerosis. So the patient is likely to have COPD and restrictive lung disease, which you have already mentioned.
Yes,
So in
sir.
view of this, why did you choose vecuronium? And if you chose vecuronium as a muscle relaxant, did you use a neuromuscular monitoring?
We didn't put a neuromuscular monitoring in our case. Actually, first for intubation only we gave vecuronium. After that, the surgery ended within 90 minutes only, and because of the prolonged action and all patient, we didn't have to give a repeat dose also. She was a non-bronchial asthmatic also, so we avoided atracurium also. So we preferred vecuronium.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's all.
Thank you.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next session, next talk?
Yeah, yeah.
Next, we have with us Dr. Deena Dayal.
Can I start, madam?
Yes, Dr. Deena, your time starts now.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Deena, junior resident from Regional Cancer Center, Trivandrum. I am presenting a case of forequarter amputation, highlighting the perioperative analgesic management. Osteosarcoma is the sixth most common cancer in adults and male. The tumor progression can lead to severe pain that may be refractory to routine analgesic. Forequarter amputation entails removal of entire upper extremity, clavicle, and scapula. Our patient is a 17-year-old male with recurrent osteosarcoma, metastatic disease, who has undergone chemotherapy, wide excision, and extracorporeal radiation treatment under general anesthesia and endoscalene block 1 year back. Now scheduled for forequarter amputation due to disease progression. On examination, there was a hard swelling 6 into 5 centimeter over the left shoulder. We counseled the patient regarding the nature of disease, palliative nature of the surgery, and regarding post-operative pain management. With the forequarter amputation that was planned for this patient, the entire the part of the body that is innervated by the brachial plexus was removed. So the continuous brachial plexus block would be ineffective for this patient. So we planned for a erector spinae plane block 2 for post-operative analgesia. So our plan of anesthesia was general anesthesia with endoscalene nerve block for surgical anesthesia and erector spinae plane block for post-operative analgesia. The patient was wheeled to OT, monitors were attached and pre-medicated with injection midazolam 0.5 milligram and injection fentanyl 50 microgram. A routine general anesthesia was induced and airway was secured, and we gave a single shot ultrasound guided endoscalene block with ropivacaine 0.5%, 10 ml with dexamethasone 8 milligram as additive. This was our incision, which the superior apex of the incision was over the clavicle, which extended infralaterally with inferior apex at the midaxillary line, and it extended posteriorly over the scapula to meet the anterior superior apex. Intraoperative period, there was no hypertension or tachycardia that pointed towards pain. Post-operatively, just before extubation, we made the patient in lateral decubitus position, and placed an ultrasound linear transducer probe parasagittally 2 centimeter away from the midline, and we identified the transverse process as a hyperechoic structure with an acoustic shadow below, and longitudinal hypoechoic structures which we identified as erector spinae, rhomboides, and trapezius. Using an 18 gauge 2-His needle, we introduced it till we contacted the transverse process, and a hydrodissection with normal saline was done, following which we inserted a catheter, and the tip was positioned 3 centimeter beyond the tip. The catheter was inserted 3 centimeter beyond the tip, following which local anesthetic, that is ropivacaine 0.2%, 5 ml per hour, were started as continuous infusion for post-operative analgesia. Throughout the am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, you were not visible in between. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
Slide has gone. I think.
Numerical pain
And
score.
slide. Please zoom your
Is
slide.
numerical,
Presentation mode.
Please
is
zoom your
numerical
slide or
pain
go to
score-
presentation mode.
You put on slide mode.
Yes, madam. Was, we assessed the numerical pain score, which was
1 minute
for
left.
the next 48 hours. Tried ultrasound guided interfacial technique aiming to block the anterior and posterior branches of spinal nerves for multidermatomal analgesia. We opted for T2 level for spread to the cervical dermatomes. Coming to conclusion, the effective perioperative pain management requires multiple approaches and multimodal interventions that should be tailored to each patient.
Yes, Dr. Deena.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Deena. Over to judges, Dr. Chittor sir.
Yes. Hello. Yeah. Did you put any analgesic agent with the ropivacaine?
No, sir. It was a plain local anesthetic
Plain
drop
local.
for continuous infusion.
But since we are managing the pain management, we must have added some adjuvants also.
Yes.
What adjuvants you can add with the ropivacaine?
Dexamethasone
Only.
or dexmedetomidine.
Because since it is a very painful condition and we have to keep the patient pain management for a long time, you must have added some long-acting analgesics.
Yes.
Yeah. How many patients you have taken in this?
This was one patient, ma'am.
20. This they all have contributed the surgery with 4-quarter amputation. All
You are asking my
what type
madam.
of surgery? All patients were for 4-quarter amputation.
No, sir. This was a patient with osteosarcoma, which was planned for 4-quarter amputation.
4-quarter.
It was a case report.
The case report.
It is a case report. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Deena. Thank you, judges. Judges, please mark your score and send it to Dr. Sam Philip after the session.
What is the how we will send by email?
Yes, sir.
No? Email address
Yes.
is.
Or you can WhatsApp to Dr. Sam Philip also.
But we are not having the email address or the.
Is it
number.
over?
No, sir. I'm just telling the reminder. That's it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Chittor sir, I will share the email ID with you.
You please.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move to the next talk. Next, we have with us Dr. Devika. Dr. Devika, unmute yourself. Dr. Devika?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes. Please share your screen.
Is the screen shared, ma'am?
Not visible.
Yeah, it is not visible. Yeah, now you can do.
Yes,
Now.
your time starts now.
Good afternoon, teachers. This is an audit on ventilated adult patients in our ICUs. The reason for the audit, ours is a tertiary referral.
I cannot see. Okay.
Yes. Oh, okay now.
Okay, carry on, please.
The reason for the audit, ours is a tertiary referral hospital which is based in Kerala. There are 7 ICUs in our hospital.
Yes.
Now.
Yeah. Now you are audible. Yeah, visible. Okay.
There are 7 ICUs in our hospital treating critically ill patients. This clinical audit was used to analyze our ICU outcomes and evaluate certain cultures practiced in our ICUs. The inclusion and exclusion criteria. We included patients in our ICUs who are ventilated for more than 24 hours over a period of 6 months, starting from December 1st, 2018 to May 31st, 2019. A total of 127 patients were selected. Out of this, we excluded children less than 16 years and patients with extended post-operative ventilation. Pediatric, neonatal, and certain patients in cardiac ICUs were thus excluded. 22 patients were excluded from the criteria. Hence, we analyzed a total of 105 patient notes. The planning and methodology that went about. The team got together to build a proforma that was broad enough to enter all necessary details. One proforma per patient, each filled by the team. The quality control team of the hospital helped us get details of patients who fulfilled the broad criteria from individual ICUs. the standards that were set, and the rationale. We analyzed outcomes based on parameters like Apache 2 score, the age of the patient, the ICU in which they were admitted, trauma, surgery, if they underwent dialysis, and infections. We tried to gauge benefits from monitoring standards, like if they had arterial and central lines, drugs, vasopressors, or steroid use in septic shock, nutrition via different routes. The findings: out of the 7 ICUs, Neuro ICU had the best outcome. It had the lowest overall age and Apache 2 scores. Considering trauma, 19% of polytrauma cases did not survive. 32% of surgical patients with more than 22 hours ICU ventilation did not survive. 82% of patients who needed dialysis in the ICUs died. 54% of the patients using inotropes or vasopressors did not survive. A 30+ Apache 2 score indicated a 90+% mortality. The overall outcome: 43% survived, 15% were transferred out, and the rest unfortunately did not make it. As you can see, I've put up a graph. There are 4 colors in the graph. The yellow colors signify the number of patients who have the respective number of Apache scores that is written below. The green color boxes signify the number of patients who recovered. The black boxes signify the number of patients who died, and the brown boxes signify the number of patients who were transferred out. As you can see in this graph, if a patient had an Apache score of more than 30, they were less likely to survive. So as the Apache scores increases, you can notice the height of the black boxes keep increasing. That is, the mortality rate is higher. Now, what we recommend from the audit that we have done: incorporation of an Apache 2 score for all patients in the first 24 hours of their ICU admission. Getting more intensivists in the ICUs for better care. Patients on vasopressors or inotropes should be better managed by having a central line and an arterial line. Dialysis and Acinetobacter infections have been shown to be independent risk factors in our ICUs. Hence, we conclude the ICU care of patients could and should be improved. Clinical audits on patient care could be eye-openers for improving the outcome of patients in our hospitals. Audits should be aimed to look at specific areas where more focused care could be provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Devika. Over to judges, Dr. Atrisa.
Yes,
Devika, what were the different types of cases you included in your study, other than the surgical cases and trauma? Because the survival overall rate.
So basically, we took.
Yes, yes.
Sir, overall, we had taken 7 ICUs. So other than the surgical side, the medical side, we included those patients who were admitted with renal failure, cardiac failure, with liver diseases. So hence we had to include the medical, the respiratory ICUs, which involve COPD patients, patients with liver diseases, all kinds of patients who were admitted in the ICUs, except those in the pediatric and the neonatal. That is, we kind of covered all the major specialties in our hospital for those who are ventilated more than 24 hours for a period of 6 months.
Have you compared any sedative drugs in your ICU for outcome of these patients?
Sir, actually, it was a retrospective study. So we wanted to see what the ICU practices, how much effective it was. That is, the use of a sedative inside the ICU was not a criteria for our audit, sir. We wanted to see how much the how well the patients were taken care of in terms of how early their admissions were made depending upon their diagnosis. If an Apache 2 score was calculated and hence risk identified and the patients were managed with certain severity, if the patients required inotropes or vasopressors, were their BP being monitored via an arterial line, were their central lines being administered, a use of a sedative was not a criteria for us to analyze the mortality risk, sir. So we did not take into consideration if a sedative was used.
Okay.
Chittor sir, any questions?
No, thank you.
Rekha ma'am, any questions?
Yeah, okay, Devika, I would like to ask you one question. your neurological ICU comprised of both surgical as well as medical patients?
Neurological ICU, yes, ma'am. It has patients post that is post craniotomy, as well as patients who are admitted with ICU patients. So we have both kind of patients in the neuro ICU, ma'am. But the thing is, since most patients admitted in the neuro ICU were post RTAs, like those patients who were admitted post RTAs with head injury, the age of the patients were less. So that is why the Apache scores turned out to be less, and hence they had a better outcome compared to the other patients. They did not have most of the bulk of the patients admitted in the neuro ICUs had lesser comorbidities compared to those admitted in SICU, MICU, and RICU. Hence, we had a better survival from the neuro ICU.
How did you standardize your method? How did you eliminate bias when you were taking so many ICUs? How did you eliminate the bias regarding their Apache score recording, like before you went into the study? How did you standardize their Apache score and other parameters like lung infection or patients on vasopressors and all that? How did you do the standardization to eliminate the bias?
Ma'am, since we had to, the main aim of the audit was to compare how our ICUs were faring with other ICUs throughout the world. So to find that, we could not eliminate major biases, since our population consisted of patients of different age groups with different symptoms. Hence, we needed one single standardization score that could be used in our ICUs as well as those that were used abroad, that is regionally, nationally, and internationally. Discussing it within our team, we found out the one thing that we could rationalize was the Apache 2 score.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Devika. Thank you, Rekha ma'am. Thank you, Atri sir. We'll move to the next session. Next, we have with us Dr. Aravindan. Aravindan, please share your screen.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes.
Good afternoon to all. The topic for my poster presentation is epidural morphine in comparison with 0.125% bupivacaine for postoperative analgesia in lower abdominal surgeries. Study was conducted under the guidance of Professor Dr. P.S. Shanmugam in Meenakshi Medical College. Epidural analgesia provides quality postoperative analgesia and reduces the requirement of systemic opioid and non-opioid analgesics, thereby avoiding undue pulmonary complications. It is one of the most effective analgesic modalities for lower abdominal surgeries, with added advantages of increased renal perfusion and reduced incidence of postoperative ileus. Neuraxial administration of opioids produces longer duration of analgesia and lesser requirement of the drug. Intrathecal administration is more effective and more potent than epidural administration, requiring less than 10% of the epidural dose of the drug, but also has a higher incidence of nausea, vomiting, and respiratory depression and pruritus. Epidural administration of up to 3.75 mg is safe and provides effective analgesia. This study was carried out to compare the analgesic effect between 0.125% bupivacaine with 1 mg morphine given as adjuvant to 0.125% bupivacaine to observe for any presence of untoward side effects produced with this dose. The sample size of 40 patients in ASC group 1 and 2 of the age group 18 to 55 years undergoing elective lower abdominal surgeries. Patients were allotted into two groups. Group B of 20 patients receiving 0.125% bupivacaine alone, and Group M of 20 patients receiving 0.125% bupivacaine with morphine as adjuvant. Duration of the surgery was between 90 to 110 minutes and was completed under spinal anesthesia with 0.5% bupivacaine heavy alone with no adjuvant, and a epidural catheter was placed in situ at L1, L2 or L2, L3 interspace. At the end of the procedure, after regression of block to T10 level, patients were administered the drug epidurally, and postoperatively, all patients were monitored for onset of pain, visual analog scale, Ramsay sedation score, along with non-invasive BP, heart rate, SpO2 monitoring, and respiratory rate monitoring. Patients were also monitored for nausea, vomiting, and pruritus for 48 hours. Patients were not administered any systemic opioids, non-opioid analgesics, or sedative hypnotic drugs. Results. Time for requirement of first analgesia was significantly earlier in Group B, earliest with 3 hours and with a mean of 4.25 hours, compared to Group M receiving morphine, earliest at 28 hours with a mean of 48.7 hours. Epidural 0.125% bupivacaine with morphine as adjuvant had higher Ramsay sedation scores. In patients receiving morphine, after 8 to 12 hours after administration, 10% of cases, 4 out of 20, had delayed reduced respiratory rate at 8 to 10 per minute. But patients were easily arousable and had saturation of more than 98% in room air. Monitoring was done with all necessary precautions and managed without any intervention. Conclusion: the analgesic efficacy of 0.125% bupivacaine with 1 milligram morphine was significantly higher than efficacy of 0.25% bupivacaine alone, and no incidence of respiratory depression was observed with this dose of 1 milligram as adjuvant.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Over to Rekha, ma'am.
Okay, now how did you calculate the sample size in this particular study?
Ma'am, we had conducted a pilot study initially with 5 patients each in each group, and we had compared the value. We had done statistical analysis on that values. Then with that, we proceeded to take a sample size of 20 cases.
So what was your primary endpoint based on which you made a sample size calculation?
Ma'am, the factors we were looking for was either a visual analog score of 5 or greater, or when patient demanded for any analgesic or complained of pain. So that duration we had taken, and time of onset of pain was...
No, you calculate your sample size based on one parameter, no? What was your parameter basing on which you calculated your sample size? Okay, now tell me, what is novel in your study?
Pardon, ma'am?
What is a new thing in your study?
Ma'am, we have earlier studies with epidural morphine. We have used morphine sulfate as adjuvant to epidural local anesthetic. Earlier studies have used higher doses of 3 to 4 milligram per dose, and different surgeries were used to compare, which included orthopedic surgeries also and upper abdominal surgeries also, which require higher dose of the drug. We have complied only lower abdominal surgeries, and we have used a lower dose to which does not cause any respiratory depression or bradypnea or hypopnea is not there with this dose, and it provides effective analgesia for at least a duration of 24 hours, ma'am. So we have aimed to find a dose which has least effect, which does not produce bradypnea or hypopnea.
So did you make a study on that? Did you make a study on that? Whether it may produce respiratory depression in a higher dose?
No, ma'am, not in this, along with this.
Okay. Now over to
Chittor, sir. Chittor, sir. Unmute, sir.
You did not notice in any respiratory depression with this dose, even in a single case?
Sir, in 4 cases, they had reduced respiratory rate, sir, from 8 to 10, but they were arousable easily, and they did not have any fall in saturation. And yes, sir.
What about the sedation?
Sir, sedation, they were sedated, sir, with Ramsay sedation score. They had score of 3 or 4 in all patients. Up to a period of 24 hours, there was marked sedation compared to the bupivacaine group, sir.
So fentanyl, morphine is better than fentanyl, or fentanyl is better?
Sir, fentanyl, the duration is shorter, sir. So late onset of respiratory depression and prolonged duration of sedation is not seen with fentanyl, sir. But with morphine, analgesia is more profound and strong, but but patients can have respiratory depression and sedation up to 24 hours with epidural dose, sir.
Okay, thank you.
From that, analgesia is superior, sir.
Thank you.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next session?
Yes.
One question, please. You have mentioned that you have given analgesic at VAS score 5 or more.
Yes, sir.
At 4 and 5, patients start feeling moderate type of pain. So, isn't you should do it at 3 or more, or 5 is okay?
Sir, we have kept a score of 4 or 5, sir, or whether if the patient demands for any analgesic, if the patient, we keep asking patient about pain, sir, they're subject to perception of pain also. If patient says pain is there, they require analgesic, we have administered other non-opioid analgesics, sir, NSAIDs.
Okay.
Whichever is earlier, sir, either the score of 5 or patient demanding for analgesic.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Arvindan. Next, we'll move
Thank you,
to the next speaker. We have with us Dr. Kirti. Dr. Kirti, please share your screen. Dr. Kirti, your time start. Yes, you are audible. Please go to the presentation mode. Slideshow, yeah. And your time starts now.
Okay. Welcome all to a case presentation on post-intubation tracheal stenosis. Tracheal stenosis following prolonged mechanical ventilation is relatively rare, but a serious complication. Today, I am presenting a case report of 24-year-old female who presented with cough, breathing difficulty, and hoarseness of voice. She had a past history of cardiac arrest 3 weeks back, associated with viral myocarditis and dengue shock syndrome. Following cardiac arrest, she was intubated with 7 millimeter high volume, low pressure cuffed endotracheal tube. Her BP was maintained at 90/60 with inotropic supports and was ventilated for 2 weeks, gradually weaned off and discharged after 3 weeks of hospital stay. When she presented with respiratory distress in our emergency department, her heart rate was 102 beats per minute and blood pressure was 130/90 millimeters of mercury. Respiratory rate was 34 per minute on auscultation, bilateral harsh breath sounds heard. All her baseline investigations were normal. ABG was suggestive of respiratory acidosis. As chest X-ray taken showed subglottic narrowing, CCT was advised, which revealed tracheal stenosis at the level of T1. And the narrowest part is measuring only 4.3 millimeters in diameter. Upper extent of the narrowing is at approximately 4.6 centimeters from the level of glottis. Then she was shifted to the operation theater and performed an emergency tracheostomy. This is the chest X-ray showing the subglottic narrowing, and these are the CT films. Now, moving on to the discussion. Though the incidence of post-intubation tracheal stenosis is 6 to 20%, only 1 to 2% of patients become symptomatic. This is because the symptoms appears when more than 30% of the tracheal diameter is stenosed. Some of the risk factors of tracheal stenosis is because of large-sized endotracheal tube or frequent change of endotracheal tube, unmonitored high cuff pressure, hypotension, concurrent infections, autoimmune diseases, or even a traumatic intubation can lead on to tracheal stenosis. So the regular cuff pressure monitoring may reduce the incidence of as anesthetist symptomatic tracheal stenosis in patients with a history.
Not audible, I think.
Dr. Kirti?
Not
Dr.
audible.
Kirti,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
is it done?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll
thank
send presentation.
Okay. Can we move on, please? Are we audible to each other?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am, you're audible, audible.
Okay, okay. Because there was a silence for some time. That is why.
Chito sir, yeah.
Yes, Kirti,
Yes, sir.
what were the, in your setup, incidence of this tracheal stenosis after mechanical ventilations? This is one
Actually,
case that you have noticed.
this is the second case.
The second case. What size of the tube you have put? And for
7
how long?
millimeter internal diameter.
For how long?
For almost 1.5 weeks.
1.5
Weeks, sir.
week. Why didn't you change the tube while it is recommended, and a smaller tube or something else maybe put?
Actually, sir, at that time, she doesn't have any
Tracheostomy must have been done.
Sir?
Tracheostomy must have been done. Why for 1 week you have put the tube?
Actually, sir, after the initial treatment of this viral myocarditis, she went back home. And 1 week later, she presented in our emergency department with respiratory distress and stridor.
Okay. Then you have put the intubation you have done after how long?
Because of the cardiac arrest. So it was done as an emergency. Maybe because of a traumatic intubation.
When you did the tracheostomy?
Tracheostomy, as we got the diagnosis, we proceed with the tracheostomy.
What is the duration after this endotracheal intubation the tracheostomy should be done? Routinely it is being considered.
Sir?
For how long the tube can be put, and if it prolongs, then we should decide for the tracheostomy.
More than 1 week.
More than 1 week. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kirti. With the interest of time, let's move to the next talk.
Okay, thank
Next, we have with us Dr. Abida. Dr. Abida, kindly share your screen.
Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Share your screen. Share.
See, apply.
There is disturbance from your end.
Okay.
Share your screen.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Are you?
Hello, sir.
Share your screen, please.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Abida. Good presentation mode. Your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here I am going to present a case series with 3 cases of major obstetric hemorrhage. Major obstetric hemorrhage is the most frequent cause of maternal mortality and morbidity, and it's defined as a blood loss of more than 1.5 liter, or a fall in hemoglobin more than 4 gram percentage, or need for transfusion of more than or equal to 4 units of blood in a parturiente. Surgical interventions, interventional radiological technique, and medical drugs remain the mainstay for the control of hemorrhage, but the need for rapid and efficient resuscitation should also gain precedence. Here we report 3 successfully managed cases of major obstetric hemorrhage. First case was a 34-year-old G3P2L2 with history of previous 2 LSAs and MRI showed placenta perpetua with urinary bladder infiltration. She underwent elective cesarean hysterectomy under GA with lumbar epidural block. Estimated blood loss was about 4.5 liter. Massive transfusion protocol was activated and she was restricted with 8 units each of PRBC, FFP platelet, 1 unit of cryoprecipitate along with 2.5 liter of Crisloids and 1 liter of colloid. Postoperatively, she was given ventilatory support for few hours and she made a good recovery. Second case was a 32-year-old G3P2L2 with history of previous 2 LSCs, referred as a case of rupture uterus, presented in shock and taken up for emergency laparotomy under GA. She underwent hysterectomy and estimated blood loss was about 5 liters. Massive transfusion protocol was activated and she was resuscitated with 9 units each of PRBC, FFP, 7 units of platelet, 1 unit of cryoprecipitate, 2 liter of Crisloids, along with 1 liter of colloid. Postoperatively, she had a good recovery without any sequelae of massive transfusion. Third case was a 19-year-old primary gravida presented with atonic PPH after expulsion of fetus following IUD. She was managed conservatively and required resuscitation with each 8 units each of PRBC, FFP, platelet, 1 unit of cryoprecipitate, along with Crisloids and colloids. Coming to discussion, poor outcomes following major obstetric hemorrhage due to delayed treatment and availability of blood and blood products, inaccurate estimation of blood loss, absence of treatment protocols, and poor communication among treating teams. Massive blood transfusion using proactive, standardized protocol is the key to volume restriction in major obstetric hemorrhage. Here is the flow chart of the major obstetric massive transfusion protocol. Here the clinician determines the need for massive transfusion. Then round 1, contact the blood bank and activate massive transfusion. Assign roles for each person, select person who administers blood products, a second person who makes calls, check labels, send laboratory investigation, record transfusion, and a third person who acts as a runner between blood bank and patient. Do baseline laboratory investigation like CBC, ABG, PT, APTT, fibrinogen, serum electrolytes, and TEC if available. And give tranexamic acid 1 gram IV bolus, then 1 gram over 8 hours. Connect surface and fluid warmers and give 4 unit PRBC and 2 unit FFP, which unanticipated hemorrhage, use O negative PRBC and ABA positive FFP. Then reassess ongoing need to transfusion. If there is no need, cease the protocol and call blood bank. If there is continuation of transfusion, then go for round 2. Give 4 units each of PRBC, FFP, and platelet. If FRS is platelet, then the ratio is 6:6:1. Consider 1 gram IV calcium after 4 units of PRBC. If fibrinogen less than 1 gram per liter, 1 unit of cryoprecipitate, and resend laboratory investigation hourly. Then reassess ongoing need to transfusion. If there is no need, cease the protocol and call the blood bank. If there is no need, then go for round 3. That's repeat round 2 and consider giving factor 7A if patient is coagulable despite the fibrinogen level more than 1.5 gram per liter and platelet more than 50,000 and control surgical bleeding with ABG normal and patient in normothermia. Then coming to preparations, like securing 14-gauge IV cannulas, standard motors along with CVP, IVP, and hello, sir.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, slideshow. Slideshow. Go to slideshow.
Standard motors along with CVP, IVP, temperature, urine output, and laboratory results. Communicate with blood bank and manpower with assigned roles. Inotox and vasopressor drugs to avoid critical hypoperfusion and to buy for time for fluid resuscitation. Rapid infusion pumps and warming devices are required and arrange postoperative ICU care. Targets of resuscitation are mean arterial pressure more than or equal to 60, SVP more than or equal to 80 to 100 millimeters of mercury, hemoglobin level 7 to 9 gram percentage, INR less than 1.5, APTT less than 42 seconds, fibrinogen level more than 1 to 1.5 gram percentage, platelet more than 50,000, pH between 7.35 to 7.45, core temperature more than 35 degrees Celsius, lactate level less than 2 milliequivalent per liter, and ionized calcium more than 1.1 millimole liter. To conclude, a defined hospital-specific protocol allows trained providers to recognize patients at risk of high-volume blood loss early, initiation of massive transfusion protocol quickly, and has specific endpoints to limit overtransfusion. Through this case series, we recommend that each hospital should formulate protocols suited to their needs and resources to improve survival in major obstetric hemorrhage. And these are my references. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Judge Dr. Vishwanath Hiremat.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Rekha. Madam, sorry, I could not interact in between. There was some problem for the connectivity. Okay. Good presentation. It is going on for about 5 speakers. I was there, and then there was a problem. Sorry. I could not interact in between. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yes, you're audible.
So it's a good presentation. Okay. How you will plan massive transfusion protocol?
How are you?
How you will plan? Yeah. What is your planning?
first of all, the clinical estimation of the blood loss was done, and it's anticipated. Then we assign the roles for each person in that team. Like first person who makes calls, and one should transfuse the blood, and third person who acts as a runner between the. Then frequent communication had done, and we had asked to issue 4 units of PRBC and 2 units F15 first round. Then reassess, and one Tanostat was given, and laboratory investigation was sent in between, but we did not wait for the result, we asked it to issue a predefined ratio of blood and blood products.
Okay, blood bank should be alerted. At the same time, the person should be available immediately to this one. And once, if your requirement is over, you have to alert the blood bank again to stop the massive blood transfusion protocol. Okay, that is also most important. Okay. What are the problems with the massive blood transfusion?
Massive transfusion, there's immediate complication and late complication. Yeah. Immediate complications due to volume restriction, like it may be inadequate restriction or overzealous restriction, and dilutional problems like dilutional coagulopathy, and due to transfusion of large amount of stored blood, there may be hyperkalemia, hypomagnesemia, hypercalcemia, citrate toxicity, acidosis, and hypothermia may be occur, and coagulopathy. Then dilutional coagulopathy, then TRALI, then transfusion associated circulatory overload, then respiratory failure, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, then multiple organ dysfunction syndrome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abeda. Thank you, Judge, Dr. Vishwanath. Let's move to the last talk of today's session.
Good afternoon, all. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay.
1 second. Go to the presentation mode, and your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My title for the poster is that does COVID-19 really has a negative impact on the emergency and elective surgeries? And the introduction is that the coronavirus disease 2019 is a global health crisis, and we, the anesthesiologists, are at a very increased occupational risk of contracting it. We know that the nationwide lockdown since the March 2020 has impacted on the lifestyle and movement of people. And we tried to do a study to analyze the change in trend of surgeries in our hospital. The aim of the study, was to find out the change in the operation rates and its proportion due to COVID-19, and to assess the change in trend of the type of surgeries in the COVID period. And we thought it would help us to prioritize the cases to be done immediately. And the methods used. The study was conducted in a tertiary care hospital in Kerala, and we performed a retrospective review of data collected from the operation theatre registers about the surgeries that were performed in our hospital during the months of February and June 2020. We selected February as a pre-COVID month because of the lockdown was announced in March 2020. We selected February as pre-COVID and June as the COVID period. The comparison of the demographic variables were represented during descriptive statistics. And the observation that we got, I have plotted 2 graphs. The first graph shows the total number of surgeries, and the green part shows the pre-COVID era, and the pink shows the COVID part. And a general assumption was that in the COVID era, the number of cases would be decreased. But we surprisingly got this data that the total number of surgeries in the pre-COVID period was actually 270, and the COVID period was actually 296, other than expected. The second graph is showing the trends in the type of surgeries. So we did group the surgeries as ENT, urology, general surgery, etc. But for a easier representation, we broadly classified this into trauma, malignancy, non-trauma emergencies, and elective surgeries. And in the pre-COVID period, the trauma cases was 65, and the COVID, it was 42. The malignancy cases, the surgical oncology cases in the pre-COVID was 45, while in the COVID, it was 73. The non-trauma emergencies, like intestinal obstruction, etc., in the pre-COVID was 31, and in the COVID, it was 44. And the elective surgeries, in the pre-COVID, it was 129, and COVID, it was 137. And the conclusion we got was that the total number of cases, including emergencies and elective surgeries, have actually increased in the COVID period, that is June, whereas trauma cases, including the orthopedic and neurosurgery cases, have decreased. The onco surgeries have significantly increased in the COVID period, most probably because our center is a cancer research hospital and due to the unavailability of the peripheral centers. And the take-home message we got was that we still need a better strategy to filter the cases that should be done to avoid unneeded exposure to the healthcare workers. And the limitation of the study may be that it lacked the data from the emergency department about the trauma cases that didn't require any surgery. I thank Dr. Darling Thomas from our department in Amala Institute, Thrissur, and these are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Charita. Over to Judge Dr. Vishwanath Hiremat.
Okay, your experience you have presented, but how it has affected overall the performance of the surgeries, in India as well as globally.
Globally, yes, sir. Globally, when I checked some other studies, most institutions, the number has drastically reduced. But this was a surprising result than expected.
Yeah, that's this one. Because actually it affected the earning of the doctors also. That you have
Yes,
to
sir.
take into consideration. It has
Yes, sir. The healthcare workers, also the number of healthcare workers also decreased due to the infection and also due to quarantines.
As well as the expense that was also playing its role, and
Yes,
people
sir.
were having.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
What was the incidence of your healthcare worker getting infected? That is very important. And your patients post-operatively. Did you have a data of that? You should have presented that.
No, ma'am.
Important.
No, ma'am. I didn't collect the data in our hospital regarding the. And in June, actually, there was no healthcare worker affected in our hospital, and it was started only in August.
Charu,
This data is over a period of which month? From which month you have taken? How many months?
Ma'am, I took each month specifically because I took February representing the pre-COVID period and June representing the full month of June representing the COVID period.
What about the other months? Early lockdown period.
Ma'am, early lockdown period was not taken. This was like a
You have
cross-sectional
just
study.
compared. Okay, we have compared February and June. So you should have mentioned that. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Charu, did your institution, the patients have been already COVID tested or suspected cases you have operated? And if
No, sir.
suspected, then what precautions you have taken? Whether it was a cumbersome preparation just to discourage the surgery, which were not emergency?
No, sir. All patients who were admitted in the casualty were done TrueNAT test or a rapid antigen test before taking them to the operation theater.
Then not operated.
Yes, sir. In June, there was no positive patients operated in our theater.
Okay.
Because no surgical patients with positive. In Kerala, it was much slower than the other states, I think, sir.
Were the surgeons were adamant to get COVID test always?
No, sir. Actually, the operation theater staff were more adamant to get the COVID test done.
This was the problem also, to discourage sometimes the surgeries which are not emergency, and that way lead to the decrease in statistics.
Yes, sir. And also when I checked that, I saw there are a lot of guidelines to conduct or defer the surgeries depending upon their severity. And such guidelines were not actually effectively implemented in our institution.
Were the trauma cases were really emergency or the semi-emergency cases?
So I included both semi-emergency and emergency cases in the trauma.
Okay.
Excuse me, was this one, whether in your institute they used, apart from the routine PPE, any specialized this for personal protective equipment?
Routine PPE
Like-
was only used, sir.
Not like
And also
PAPR.
we used,
PAPR.
plastic sheet over the patient
Hmm.
to prevent aerosol spread.
Not purified air, this one, respirator, purifying respirator, PAPR.
Purifying respirators were used only, some surgeons were using, but most people were using routine PPEs.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we have come to the end of this poster session, behalf of team ISA WebCon Kerala 2020, I thank our judges, Rekha ma'am, Chittor sir, Vishwanath sir, and Atri sir. Thank you for your valuable time.
I would also like to thank the organizers and also the speakers. All the papers were very nice, very well presented, and overall it's very difficult to mark them. There is a very keen competition and there is a difference of only a few marks between them. So everybody should think is a winner. All the presentations were very nice.
Thank you
Thank
to the
you.
organizers. Really, the presenters have a margin to margin. Markings are, they have nicely presented and well arrangements. Organizers have managed a very nice facilities for the presenter, and everything is being coordinated. Thank you very much to them.
I know, a very good organization. Thanks to the organizer also.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank-
Bye bye.
Thank you, madam. In between, it was difficult for me because of the connectivity problem. And it was very nice presentation, as you commented, and amazing experience, and all the efforts taken by Kerala ISA and specifically our Venkatgiri sir is well appreciated. It should be.
We must specifically thank Professor Venkatgiri for this
Yes.
wonderful organization.
Wonderful organization and this.
I don't think he's here, but he was there at the initial part.
Mhm.
We should all
Okay.
give a very good
Yeah.
thank to him.
Yeah.
Thank you all again.
He's pillar behind this successful event.
Thank you to
ma'am.
the all judges also for
Yeah.
nice cooperation.
Mhm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Once again, I
It is
thank
also very difficult for us to decide which will be the better.
Once again, I'll thank all the judges and all our participants, our presenters. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Kindly send the link or the mail ID to which we shall give our numbers.
Yeah, ma'am, sure.
Our poster assessment.
I think we have got of the Dr. Same link.
I will
Mobile
post in
number-
a chat, sir. Email ID.
Email ID and phone number we have got on WhatsApp.
Yeah, the same number. Dr. Sam
Okay.
Philip.
Dr. Sam. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.